Welcome to Crown TV. Immerse yourself with a captivating audio from our stories. We provide an alternative way to read books in audio. We upload many audiobooks as possible, from bestsellers to timeless classic. Subscribe and stay tuned for new upload.
Episode 291, Reunion. When Art finished speaking, everyone around him laughed. Julian laughed loudest of all. "What have the Cliftons come to if they're getting such garbage to fight their battles for them?" he said. "It's pathetic. You might as well give up right now." His words caused an uproar among the Cliftons. "Shut your mouth," one of them shouted. "Maybe you should come to our turf and say that." Julian sneered. "Things have changed. If you ever see me coming, you'd better come out and greet me with respect." "Art, where's the man who killed Paul?" Jessup interjected. He still couldn't understand how anyone could have killed Paul Novak so easily. "You'll see Damon soon enough," Art answered. "But by then, your family will be working for mine." Art had been worried about the outcome of the fight. But when he saw that the Cliftons had chosen Alex to be their fighter, his worries had melted away. "I hear there's going to be a fight," a voice suddenly called out. "That sounds like fun." Alex recognized the voice. He looked towards the entrance, and he saw a young man and a young woman coming into the hall. The man was wearing an expensive jacket that shimmered in blue and gold, and he wore gold-colored shoes. He came strutting toward the fighting ring like a model on a runway. The young woman walked beside him with her head lowered. She was gazing straight into the floor and had her hands in her pockets. She looked completely uninterested in her surroundings. When they came closer, Alex realized that they were Justin and Nellie. Nellie was now officially a member of the Ambrose family. Although the entire Ambrose family had embraced her as one of their own, she had insisted that she didn't want to be a part of the family business. Lincoln had accepted her decision and told her that she could do as she liked. But she was still unhappy. She was like a completely different person. Where before she had been bold and unafraid to speak her mind, now she was quiet and sullen. Her father, Tristan, had asked Justin to spend time with her and try to cheer her up. Justin had grown fond of her, and he had taken her to as many places as he could think of, showing her all his favorite hangouts. He had treated her to the best food and amusements he could find, but nothing had worked. Finally, he had heard about the big fight between the Cliftons and the Stedmans. He thought it sounded like a lot of fun, so he had taken her to see it. As they walked further into the hall, Justin glanced at her to try to gauge her reaction. He hoped he had finally found something that pleased her. But when he looked beside him, she was gone. She had run off ahead of him into the arms of one of the men in the room. When they embraced, she started crying. Justin tilted his head curiously, wondering what was going on. But as he drew a little closer, he saw that the man she had run to was Alex. Justin smiled broadly. He was happy to see Alex too. But before he could speak to his brother, a voice called out for him. It sounded like Nathan's voice. "What are you doing in Baltimore, cousin?" he asked. Justin was surprised. How does Nathan know where I am? He thought. And how is he talking to me? Is he here? He looked around to try and find him. "Look to your right," Nathan said. "See that cell phone?" A man came walking up to Justin and held a phone up to his face. So that's what he's doing, Justin thought. He's watching the whole thing through his phone. "I heard there was going to be a big fight," Nathan explained. "I had to see it. And then I saw that poor little Alex would be one of the fighters. I guess that's what happens when you don't have a family. You have to leech off of others and do everything they tell you. It's pathetic." "He's better than you," Justin blurted out. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Alex and Nellie looking curiously between him and the cell phone from which Nathan was speaking. He realized they could hear the conversation. He was a little embarrassed that Alex had heard him speak about his abilities so confidently, but Justin did believe in him. "Oh, Justin," Nathan responded derisively. "Still living in a fantasy, are you?" There was a brief pause, and then Nathan continued. "Just remember that Alex isn't part of the family anymore. If you try to help him, you'll only get yourself into trouble." Justin paused, unsure of what to do. If he tried to help Alex, Nathan would use it to turn their grandfather against him. There could be serious consequences. "Alex doesn't need my help," he said finally, puffing out his chest. "He'll win anyway." Nathan laughed. "Like I said, you're living in a fantasy. Do you know who he's fighting? I'll tell you. His opponent is Damon Walker. He's a member of the Blood Brothers, and he's never been beaten. Just recently, he killed Paul Novak with ease. What do you think he'll do to poor little Alex?" Episode 292. Place your bets. Nathan's words made Justin and Nellie very nervous. Justin looked at Alex. He was starting to think that his brother might be in over his head. Then he remembered that Nathan was watching, and he pulled himself together. "Alex won't lose," he roared. Then he grabbed the phone and ended the call. Nellie looked pleadingly at Alex and grabbed him by the arm. She wanted to pull him out of the room and get as far away from there as they could. "I can't let him do this," she thought. "It's too dangerous." Justin stopped her. He was as worried about Alex's safety as she was, but she still believed that he had a chance. Besides, he knew better than to try to stop him. "Listen, Nellie," he said to her. "He's not going to leave. He's too stubborn. Let's just sit down and show him that we support him. I know he can do this." Nellie glared at him doubtfully. Justin forced himself to smile and added, "Listen to your older brother, huh?" "Don't worry, Nellie," Alex said. "I'll win." Nellie could see that Justin was right, and she calmed down. They found a couple of nearby seats and sat down. Nellie buried her face in her hands and started to cry. She believed in Alex, but the tension was unbearable. Chelsea sat behind them. She had listened to the entire exchange, and she was deeply moved. "There's more to this fight than I first thought," she realized. "The stability of the whole city could be at stake." Alex had already stepped into the ring. To his left stood the referee, a fat little middle-aged man who looked like a retired boxer. The other corner of the ring was empty. Damon hadn't come yet. The audience grew restless. Damon was resting in another room in the building. He had arrived with Art and Chris, but the crowd had been too noisy for him. So they had found him another place to prepare for the fight. He had taken a short nap, and he had just woken up. He stood up and stretched. Then he walked over to the window. It looked out over the fighting ring. The ring itself was right below him, just a few meters down. He saw a young man standing in the ring, and that the entire audience was seated. They looked like they were ready for the fight to start. Damon smiled. He knew just how to make his entrance. With one focused punch, he broke the window glass, and then he jumped. He flew through the air down into the ring, and then he stood tall to face Alex. The entire room was shocked. Many didn't know what was happening, and some covered their heads in fear. When they looked up, they saw Damon standing there. He looked strong and fierce. To many people in the audience, there was no doubt who would win the fight. Damon stared at Alex and chuckled. Then he looked away and faced the audience. Alex was nothing to him. He had faced far worse, some very recently. "It appears that our two fighters have arrived," the referee announced. "The fight will begin in a few minutes. Before we start, I would like to remind you that bets may be placed on the outcome of this fight. If you're interested, you know where to go to place your bets." Information about the fight had been spread to all the relevant families on the East Coast, and a secure website had been set up on a secure network where bets could be placed. The bets were expected to range in the millions of dollars. Many in the audience took out their phones and logged into the network. The current state of the betting pool was displayed on a large screen above the ring. New bets came flowing in. Some people were betting on Alex, but many more were for Damon. It was obvious that he was the clear favorite. Everyone who sat close to Art and Chris muttered loudly about how much they had bet on Damon. Art looked pleased. It was clear that everyone expected his fighter to win, and they all wanted to be on his good side. Lee Dempsey sat quietly. Like everyone else, he had also placed a bet on Damon. He was still angry with Alex and Justin for the way they had humiliated him and thought this was a good opportunity to get revenge without having to do any real work himself. But he felt no need to advertise his bet. As long as Alex was beaten and Justin was there to see it, he would have what he wanted. "There's no contest," Julian exclaimed while looking straight at Chris. "Our family's betting $7 million on Damon. Easiest money I ever made." Then he noticed Chelsea. He looked at her and sneered. "Officer Wood, you're sitting with the Cliftons. I guess you think their little punk has a chance. What a joke. Why don't you put your money on it, if you have any?" Everyone around Chelsea looked at her, and she felt ashamed. She thought that she had degraded herself, sitting in such a rotten place and being insulted by people like Julian. "Only half an hour ago," she thought, "I would have called for backup and gotten this place shut down without a second thought. But things aren't so simple now. I'm not sure what to do." She looked up at Alex on the stage. She thought of their encounter in the interrogation room, and she thought about their kiss, her first kiss. Despite the danger he was in, she had hope that he might win. "Yes, I support the Cliftons," she blurted out. Her statement shocked her. She was a police officer, and now she was openly taking sides in an underground battle. All of it was unimaginable to her. But she had her reasons. Somehow the choice had been obvious. Alex supported the Cliftons, and it was clear to her that they were the lesser evil. "I'll bet $10,000, she said loudly. She said it for Alex's sake. She hoped that her support would help him to fight harder. She didn't want to think about what would happen if he lost. Julian looked at her. "Come on, officer. 10,000? Are you trying to be funny? I thought you were rich. Maybe I was wrong." Chelsea ignored him. Celeste and Celine were sitting close enough to hear the entire exchange. They knew that the room was against Alex, and they understood that Chelsea had bet on him to show support. They realized that they should do the same. They stood up. "We'll bet $3 million on Mr. Alex," Celeste shouted. Julian stared at them in disbelief. "Oh, hello there, beauties," he said derisively. All he saw was a couple of pretty girls, and he didn't take them seriously. "Do you really have that kind of money? You'll lose it anyway." Justin had had enough of Julian's attitude. "Watch yourself, pal. My brother's much better than you think he is. I bet $15 million on Alex. Any objections?" "Just wait and see," Julian retorted. As cocky as he was, he knew he had to watch himself around Justin. Suddenly, Jessup rose from his seat. "Our family believes in Alex," he said. "We bet $150 million. He looked at Rufus. Rufus hesitated, but he took out his phone and logged on to place the bet. The audience was shocked. $150 million? Art asked with a smile. "Mr. Clifton, that must be a fifth of everything you own. Maybe you should reconsider. After today, people will still want paychecks from you." "I have complete confidence in Alex," Jessup answered. "Worry about your own business and leave mine to me." "Well, I don't know if it's confidence or stupidity," Art said. "But I'm not going to be outdone by you. We bet $150 million on Damon." Chris took out his phone and made the bet. These two giant bets were displayed on the giant screen. But suddenly, an even greater bet popped up above them. It was a bet for $300 million. And the location marker showed that it came from somewhere outside the country. When it appeared on the screen, the crowd erupted in an outburst of shock. Everyone started murmuring about who could have placed such an enormous bet. Even Jessup and Art were taken aback. "It must be Nathan," Justin thought. "The family keeps a lot of money in offshore accounts, and he's watching. He's trying to lower Alex's spirits. Nobody else could have made that bet." He looked up at Alex in the ring and cheered for him in his heart. "Come on, Alex. You have to win." Episode 293, Getting a Leg Up. The fight was about to begin. Everyone in the room understood that Damon had the advantage. He had received the most bets by far, and his entrance had made all of them afraid of his strength and skill. The referee stepped forward and raised his hands to get the crowd's attention. "Now we come to what we've all been waiting for. Here are the rules. The two sides have each picked a champion to represent them, and their contest decides who rules the city of Baltimore. There is no time limit and there are no points. The only way to end the fight is through surrender or death." "Ladies and gentlemen," he continued, "get ready. Tonight's contest starts..." He paused, drawing out the suspense before finally crying, "Now!" The referee stepped back and went out of the ring. The audience roared, and Alex and Damon stood looking at each other. "You could just give up now," Damon said and looked at Alex with disdain. "Just kneel and admit defeat and you won't get hurt." Damon lived for fighting, but he took no pleasure in fighting Alex. When he looked at him, he saw a rookie and a weakling. The mere thought of fighting him was insulting. "I'd say the same to you," Alex responded. "You could just stop boasting and back out. Have you ever heard the expression, the bigger you are, the harder you fall?" Alex respected Damon as a fighter. He had heard plenty of stories about the other man's skills. But when he had opened his mouth and spoken to him the way he had, it had only increased his urge to fight. Damon was too arrogant, and Alex was determined not to grovel before him. "I gave you a chance, you little fool," Damon said. Alex's response had angered him. "I won't go easy on you." Suddenly, Damon made his first move. He leapt into the air and straightened his leg as he came down on Alex. He looked like a javelin, and his foot was like a steel weight coming to crush its target. Alex reacted quickly. He braced himself, held out his hands, and caught Damon's foot as it came down on him. He directed it straight downward in front of him, and Damon's foot cracked the wood as it went straight through the floor. Alex was shocked. It was no wonder that this man had defeated Paul. If this first strike had come down on me, he thought, it would have crushed me. While Damon yanked his foot out of the hole in the floor, Alex took the opportunity to step over to the other side of the ring. Damon was also surprised. If this kid can so easily defend against that move, he thought, then he's a more worthy opponent than I thought. He looked at Alex and smiled. "I'm glad. I thought this fight would be boring." His face grew darker. "But you should have stood still and accepted it. It would have been less painful. Instead, you decided to try to fight me. You're going to regret that." He threw himself at Alex once again. As he came flying through the air, his legs moved in a frenzied pattern. Alex thought it would be impossible to defend himself against his attack. So he chose not to do so. He decided to go on the offense. He leapt forward and met Damon in the air. As he passed over Damon, Alex parried his kicks and tried to jam his heel into his chest. But they were evenly matched. They passed safely each other and landed on opposite sides of the ring. Damon was growing more and more perplexed. He still thought of Alex as a child. But now this child had parried 2 of his attacks. It was unacceptable. "Take this," he shouted, as he struck at Alex with his left leg. Alex caught the leg with both hands and twisted to redirect the force of its momentum. Then he used his body weight to force Damon to swing much wider than he had anticipated, and it caused him to lose his balance. He fell to the floor. Art became nervous. The fight was not going as he thought it would. He gripped the edges of his armrests tightly and stared nervously at the combatants. Damon stood up. "You little twerp," he shouted. "You've just made me angry. Now I'm going to destroy you." He was deeply embarrassed. Alex had made him lose face in front of an entire group of people, and his honor was at stake. Not only his honor, but the honor of the Blood Brothers gang he represented. There was only one way to fix it. He stared at Alex with murder in his eyes. He readied himself to make another attack. But as he bent his legs to leap at Alex, the floor creaked loudly and gave way beneath him. He cried out as he fell into a hole, and he got stuck halfway down. As he pulled himself up, his trousers ripped, revealing his strong legs. Alex could immediately tell how Damon's kicks could carry such force. His legs were thick and twisted with muscles. They were more like tree trunks than human limbs. He must have been training kicks every day of his life. Damon readied himself for another attack. This time he did not use his legs for kicking. Instead, he used the explosive power of his whole body to rain heavy punches down on Alex. His onslaught was like a tornado, and Alex could not help but go on the defensive. Damon had practiced this move often. It required immense skill and stamina, and he knew that it would drain his energy. But he had to finish Alex off quickly to regain his honor, and he could think of no other way. The audience was taken aback by the sheer force of Damon's attack. Celeste, Celine, and Nellie cried out in fear. They worried that this attack would be too much for Alex to handle. Alex concentrated all his strength on defending himself. He knew that if he made the slightest mistake, he would be seriously injured. When he was given a slim respite from Damon's barrage, he focused all his power on his legs and pushed himself off the ground. Damon matched his move. Their feet met in the air, and all their combined power collided in a single point. The impact rushed through Damon's leg. It felt as if he had been hit by a tidal wave. He let out a blood-curdling scream and fell to the floor. His leg had been broken in several places. Alex landed neatly on the floor beside him. He was not hurt at all. He could hardly believe it. It felt as if my leg was being torn apart, he thought. But I think my internal force protected me. It's all thanks to Georgina and Zora's power. The audience was stunned. They stared in disbelief at what had happened, and then they broke out in an uproar over the unbelievable result. Art's face was gloomy and terrible. His neck was throbbing, and his heart was in his throat. "Get back up and destroy him!" Chris shouted at Damon in desperation. He refused to believe what he was seeing. They could not afford to lose this fight. Julian joined in. "Get up!" he cried anxiously. "You pathetic scum! We've bet the future of our families on you!" "There's no point," Celeste told him. "His leg bone is broken. It's over. I told you he was no match for Mr. Alex. It was stupid of him to try." Damon thrashed around on the floor in the ring. He held onto his legs and groaned painfully. Alex walked up to him and watched him. He almost felt bad for him. "Do you surrender?" Alex asked. He hadn't forgotten the rules of the fight. It wouldn't end until one of them conceded or was killed. And he wanted to spare Damon's life. "Surrender?" Damon asked and looked up at Alex. He tried to smile, but the pain was too much for him. He muttered through the pain. "Should I surrender to someone like you? You're nothing. You don't even understand what you've done. I could never surrender to you." He forced himself to laugh, but it quickly turned into agonizing spasms. When they stopped, he started muttering to himself, "I'm nothing. Defeated by nobody. My leg's been destroyed. I'll never fight again. But fighting is my life. I can't live without it." He looked Alex in the eye, and Alex was struck with the terrible realization that he knew what was about to happen. Before he could react, Damon rested his head against one of the protruding floorboards. The look in his eye was a curious mix of emptiness and determination. He took a deep breath. Then he raised his arm and struck himself as hard as he could on the side of the head. Blood ran down from his neck and from his nostrils, and his body turned limp. His legs twitched slightly, and then he stopped moving. Episode 294, A Change of Circumstances. The audience was filled with nervous confusion. Nobody seemed to understand what was happening. The referee stepped into the ring and knelt beside Damon. He looked him over and put his fingers to the side of his neck. He closed his eyes and stood up. Then he walked over to Alex. The audience looked at him in stunned silence. "The winner is Alex," he exclaimed and raised Alex's arm. Nobody cheered. Nobody made any sound at all. Everyone was in shock. They couldn't believe what had happened, and they couldn't accept it. Most of them had thought that Alex didn't stand a chance. They had placed all their support and most of their money behind the Stedmans. After a few seconds of complete silence, someone started clapping over where the Cliftons were sitting. Others started cheering. Before long, the entire family erupted in a sea of jubilation. Most of those who supported the Cliftons had been just as surprised as anyone else. Many of them had doubted Jessup's decision to put Alex up against Damon. Some had expected the Cliftons to lose everything, and they had watched in disbelief as Jessup seemingly gambled away the family fortune. But Alex had won easily. Jessup knew what he was doing. The Cliftons had come out on top. Celeste and Celine immediately ran up into the ring and threw themselves around Alex. "We were worried for you, Mr. Alex," said Celeste. "I'm sorry. We shouldn't have doubted you." Justin and Nellie were ecstatic. Justin was so excited he couldn't stop waving his arms in the air. "I knew he could do it," he thought. "I knew it." Nellie was less animated, but she was shaking from intense relief. Once the tension had worn off, she also ran into the ring and hugged Alex as hard as she could. "I'm so glad you're okay," she whispered in his ear. "I said I would be," Alex said. He touched her nose and smiled. "I wouldn't lie to you." The entire Clifton family gathered around them. They looked at Alex as if he was the savior of the family, and their eyes were filled with gratitude and joy. One by one, they all came up to shake his hand and thank him. Then they stood aside to make some room as Jessup and Rufus approached. Jessup shook Alex's hand. He looked more relaxed than Alex had ever seen him. "Alex, thank you. You've done a great service to our family. How could we ever repay you?" Alex was overcome with joy, but he knew he had to be careful. As tempting as it was to ask for something wild like a wedding with Debbie the next week, this wasn't the time to go asking for big favors. He remembered what Jessup had told him before. In front of all these people, he had to make sure not to mention Debbie. "Don't mention it, Mr. Clifton. I'm glad to be of service," he responded. Jessup and Rufus both nodded knowingly. From the looks on their faces, Alex could tell how happy they were with his performance and his discretion. Alex was thrilled that this opportunity to please Debbie's family had gone so well. The people in the audience sat and watched as Jessup and Alex talked, frantically recalculating their business plans in their heads. Many of them had been considering abandoning the Cliftons in favor of the Stedmans. But now it was clear the Clifton family would now be the undisputed masters of the city, and anyone who went against them would be in trouble. Jessup would surely have noted who had bet against him. They had to get back on his good side. "The Cliftons are the winners!" someone shouted so that Jessup would hear. "It was stupid to bet against them. I knew Jessup would find the better fighter." Others joined in the adulation, and the whole room was soon singing Jessup's praises. Before long, the outburst morphed into admonitions of the Stedmans. Someone questioned the value of being under their protection, while others called them upstarts who didn't belong in Baltimore. One person even dared to say that Art was past his prime. The Stedman family looked around them with contempt. Chris was teeming with anger. He wanted to scream at them to shut their mouths, but he stopped himself. Since they had just lost the fight, there was nothing he could say or do. Julian's family were sitting right next to him. One of them began to join in with the praise of Jessup, but Chris turned to him and stopped him with an angry look. Chelsea saw this and couldn't help but laugh. By now, Jessup had left the stage. He came down the aisle and walked straight up to Art. "Mr. Stedman, the fight is done. Tonight I'll instruct my people to begin the process of taking over your interests. Can I count on your assistance?" "It's all yours," Art answered indignantly. He looked around and saw only ridicule around him. There was no point in staying. "We're leaving," he exclaimed. The whole family rose from their seats and walked out. As they left, none of them so much as glanced at Jessup. They walked out of the fighting hall and went to their cars. Once Chris and Art had gotten into the car, Art exploded in anger. He started shaking violently and punched the seat in front of him repeatedly. Before long, his knuckles were stained with blood. He had worked for this day for over 30 years. He had planned and bided his time. It had seemed like the perfect time to make his move and seize control of the city. But the plan had failed, and all was lost. His influence in Baltimore was gone, and he had lost half his fortune. The driver and Chris were looking at him nervously. Chris hardly recognized the calm and collected public official his father had been. Nor could he see a trace of his shrewd and calculating side. In their place, there was a madman. A lunatic who looked like Art Stedman, but who was someone entirely different. Nathan had watched the entire fight from his luxurious villa in Chicago. He had been looking forward to seeing Damon kill Alex, He had expected it. Instead, Damon had lost, and Nathan had lost $300 million. The money doesn't matter, Nathan thought. It's nothing to an Ambrose. But my grandfather will notice. He hates gambling. And I'll have to explain it to him. He turned his attention back to his phone, which was still streaming live from the fighting ring. On the screen, he could see Alex. He was surrounded by people who were slapping his back and congratulating him. They were treating him like a hero. Enraged, Nathan threw his phone into the wall. Then he stood up, kicked the TV and sofa, and smashed the mirror on the wall to pieces. Suddenly, the telephone in the living room rang. Nathan composed himself. He had been expecting the call. He knew that it was Colin Patterson, and he knew what he wanted. Nathan owed Colin for his help at his grandfather's birthday party, and he was calling to collect. Colin wanted to topple the Drakes and rule Washington, D.C. Nathan was happy to oblige. He picked up the phone and heard Colin's respectful voice. "Hello, Nathan. I've done as you said. Several important people at the Drakes Fidelity Group are working for me now. When do we make our move?" Colin was impatient. He had been looking forward to taking down the Drakes since he returned from Lincoln's birthday party. He had spent his days fantasizing about being the top dog in Washington, D.C., and about propelling his family to national prominence. But he needed Nathan's help to do it. Nathan took a deep breath and quelled his frustrations. "Good. We'll get started tomorrow. First, you'll ask the people you've bribed to resign from the company. The company will crumble, and then you can buy it on the cheap. I'll help you get the funds. Once you've gobbled up all their property, you'll be the richest man in town." Could it really be that easy? Colin asked with giddy anticipation. The Drakes have been a staple of Washington for a generation, he thought. Could they be wiped away so quickly? "Are you doubting me?" Nathan asked coldly. "No, of course not," Colin quickly responded. He knew Nathan well enough to not second-guess him. If he felt slighted, he might withdraw his support on a whim. "With your help, I know we'll succeed." Nathan laughed. "Listen, Colin, you'll be the biggest fish in Washington soon. Just remember who put you there, and who could bring you down." "Yes, Nathan, I'll remember." "Good. Now, do as I said, and I'll call you back in 2 days. And cheer up." With that, Nathan hung up the phone. Episode 295, Tender Love. Back at the underground boxing ring, people were flocking around Jessup. Everyone was desperate to get on his good side. He raised his arms to calm them down. The frenzied murmur died down. "I know that many of you bet against me this evening," he said. "But I won't hold it against you. It's in the past. Anyone who wishes to work with me is welcome to do so. But if you go against me again, I won't forgive a second time." The people around him nodded and murmured deferentially. They looked very nervous. At that moment, Alex thought that they would agree to anything that Jessup said. Jessup and Alex walked together out of the room, and the entire Clifton family followed. Justin and Nellie followed, as did Celeste and Celine. Once they were outside, Jessup stopped and turned to Alex. "Alex, please come back to the house with us. We'll have a dinner to celebrate your success." I'm grateful, Mr. Clifton, Alex responded. But I can't. I've promised to be somewhere else. I hope you understand. Jessup smiled knowingly and nodded. It seemed to Alex that he understood where he was going. He shook Alex's hand, said goodbye, and went over to his car. The entire family followed. Once they had all driven away, Justin and Nellie walked up to Alex. Now that they were alone, they felt more comfortable trying to talk to him. So, are you going to start being happy again? Alex asked Nellie. He looked at her with mock concern. I remember when I gave you some money and you were so happy. Tonight I saw that you bet on me and won much more than that. You should be laughing hysterically. Nellie chuckled. She grabbed Alex's ear and pulled gently at it. Alex, I guess you haven't been bullied in a while. Don't get cocky. They looked at each other. At that moment, it seemed to both of them that they were back selling pancakes on the streets of Washington, D.C. Now let's get out of here, she said to Justin as she let go of Alex's ear. She was content. Now that she knew where Alex was and that he was safe, she could go back home. All right, Justin answered. They hugged Alex goodbye and left for the parking lot. Alex, Celeste, and Celine were also ready to leave. But then, Alex suddenly noticed Chelsea. She was standing nearby, watching them. She had been severely rattled by the evening's event. The world had seemed simple to her before. Now everything was a blur. Are you taking me back to the police station? Alex asked as he walked over to her. I guess I must have committed some sort of crime based on what happened in there. No, Chelsea answered. She wasn't a fool. She knew that the fight had to happen, or there might have been gang warfare in the streets. What Alex had done had saved the city from disaster. Then what are you doing here? Alex asked curiously. Chelsea was speechless. She didn't know what to say, so she lied. I just wanted to thank you. You made me a lot of money tonight. Alex laughed. Then I guess we're leaving, he said. He turned to leave, and the Moon Girls followed him. Wait a minute, Chelsea blurted out. You should know something. The guy you fought, he's from a very powerful gang. When they hear what happened, they might want revenge. You should be careful. Alex was surprised at her outburst. Caring advice was the last thing he had expected from Chelsea. Thanks, I will be. But you don't need to worry about me. I don't think they'll come after me. They know that they could lose, and it would be too shameful for them to get shown up like that, especially when they've just lost an important member of their group. Chelsea steeled herself. I'm not worried about you. I just thought I'd mention it. Alex turned around and walked away. Chelsea watched as he and the girls got into a taxi and left. Then she walked over to her scooter and drove away, still thinking about what Alex had said. She knew why she'd followed him outside, but she didn't want to admit it. Only a few hours earlier, she had hated him. But then he had stepped into the ring, and her disgust at the memory of their kiss had turned into joy. When she arrived home and parked her scooter, she was still thinking about the extraordinary things she had witnessed that night. Alex and the girls went straight back to the residential building at the university. It must be past 10 o'clock, he thought. Debbie must be wondering where I am. I'll go back quickly, change my clothes, and call her. When they got out of the taxi and rushed toward the door, they saw Debbie waiting outside. Callisto and Luna were with her. I'd better call him, he heard Debbie saying. What if something's happened? No, Callisto protested. He won't answer. He's working. His boss sent him to a different area for tonight, so he must not be home until tomorrow. He can't answer the phone while he's working. It was a good cover story. Alex felt guilty that they had to lie to Debbie, but she couldn't find out that he was fighting on behalf of her family. Debbie put her phone away. She seemed to have believed the story. When he got close enough, Alex called out to her. Debbie! She turned around and saw him come toward her with a smile on his face. She ran to him and took his hands. Callisto and Luna sighed relief. Sorry, there was a big event today and Tony transferred me, Alex said. I just came from there. Debbie gave him a puzzled look. Can he just transfer you to other places like that? Alex played dumb. Apparently. Anyway, I'm back now. Do you want to go for a walk in the park? Yes, let's go for a walk together, Celeste exclaimed. The Moon Girls all looked excited. They walked over to a little park nearby. In the center, there was a beautiful little pond with willow trees and rocks along the edges. A cool breeze played through the branches of the trees and made the surface of the pond glimmer in the moonlight. It was a beautiful evening. Debbie's body trembled slightly. Are you cold? Alex asked her. He took her hands and warmed them. The Moon Girls giggled. They enjoyed seeing Alex and Debbie so happy together. They stayed at the pond for a little while. When it got colder, Alex accompanied Debbie back to the residential building. He said goodnight to Debbie and the Moon Girls, and then he went back to his dormitory. He washed and lay on the bed. Now that Don wasn't there, he was all alone. I must go and see him soon, he thought. He hoped Don was settling down in the hospital. He needed to rest and recover from the beating he had taken. He could feel himself drifting off into sleep. He had managed to not get hurt, but he was sore and very tired. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the door. Mr. Alex, it's us. He heard Celeste's voice calling from outside. He got out of bed and opened the door. All four of the Moon Girls were standing outside. It was cold. Alex quickly let them into the room. Mr. Alex, we know you're very tired, Celeste said. We came to help you relax. She paused as if she knew what he might be thinking. Don't worry. When we left, the light in Debbie's room was out. Alex sighed. He still wasn't completely comfortable with how the girls were serving him. He worried at times that Debbie would get the wrong idea. But he knew they meant well, and he couldn't help but be touched by their devotion. Listen, I'm really tired tonight, he said. If you really want to, you can give me a quick massage. But then you need to go and get some sleep. He lay back down on the bed. The Moon Girls came up beside him and put their hands on different parts of his body. He felt their hands rubbing his neck, his back, his thighs, and his feet. It felt incredible. It must be because of their martial arts training, Alex thought. That must be why their grips are so strong. Slowly, Alex fell asleep. The Moon Girls tried to talk to him and nudged him gently. When he started snoring softly, they realized that he was sleeping. "Let's get him into bed," Celeste whispered. The other three nodded. They lifted his body, slowly turned him over, and tucked him in. When they were done, they stood over him with adoration in their eyes. They knew that they were bound to serve him. That was the only relation they had to him, and there could never be more. As they turned off the light and left the room, they looked at each other. In each of their eyes, there was the glimmer of a hopeless fantasy. But they all knew that it was impossible. Their mission was to care for him, and any other desires must be channeled solely into that pursuit. They went back to their room and went to sleep.
Thank you for listening to Crown TV. Please don't forget to subscribe, share and turn on the notification button.